Welcome everybody to this workshop on building user adaptive interfaces with media preferences. I'm Adam Argyle. I'm super stoked to walk you through this today. It's marked as a beginner workflow today, or like a beginner task, but let's just say the beginner aspects of this is that you'll be going for a ride, and I'm going to take you on this ride. You're going to copy and paste code and see it react in the page, sort of update with your changes. But just know that this is jam-packed with various things to learn about today about CSS and just building on the web. We are entering a new type of web where things don't just change to the screen size, they change to my operating system and the preferences that I've made on that. And the way that those flow into our page can get us into this new era of user adaptive interfaces. And so we're going to, program our entire, all of our code today is in this premonition that we want to be building for user adaptivity. We want the choices of our users to be reflected inside of here. So, okay, like that's what we're doing. Here's kind of what we're building. I like dark themes, so that's why we have a dark mode user settings page down here. And if I go into like a mobile view, you can see it go into a mobile view, right? Okay, so nothing too surprising here. This is basically kind of like responsive design, but what we're going to get into is sort of these really small details and decisions that we're going to make from the ground up that put the user first. And so let's talk a little bit about like user preferences. Like your device that you chose was is a choice. It's an option for you, whether you were on mobile or desktop. These are things that you bring to the table. It also comes down to like, what language do you have set on your device? What language and direction do you like to read in? These are all things that should play all the way into your page. You're here to just consume some content, right? Like we're in this era now where the page can bend to me instead of me bend to the page. And let's look at like some more of those things that we can do here. So we have like device viewport. We've talked about that before. This is like, we have 10 years of like device viewport reactivity in our layouts and stuff. Device orientation, so we're rotating it. Font size has been something that's been around for a while, but is often overlooked, where the user, they can choose a font size in their browser, and you have a choice as an author to collaborate and not use it, or to build upon it and sort of work up from it. And so that's what I mean. We're going to be using relative units today. And for one thing is font size. We're going to be making sure that that user's font size is respected in our application. Online on offline, network connectivity, color scheme. This one's really popular right now, light and dark. Users land on the page and they don't know what theme it was originally built in, and it's not the brand theme. It's now adapting to me as the user. We have interface animations that can know whether or not you like motion or not, right? We have that option in our interface. Let's use that in our pages. We have input, like, are they on a keyboard? How are they even interfacing with this page? Are they on a Nintendo Switch? If they're on a Switch, they don't have a mouse. So how are they going to fill out and use your experience? We want to make sure that we are listening to that. We have document dimension, direction and writing modes. We have the display mode, so whether or not they're even launching in a browser or from an app experience. And then things coming down the pipe, or we have like reduced data. So are they browsing in a reduced like data saver state? We can change the page. We can change the page based on how many colors their device can display. So if someone's visiting from a older device, we don't want to, show crazy colors there. We want to show just the ones that it can display. These are like where web safe was there. And now we have colors that go really vibrant these days in these really dynamic screens. And so a user is bringing capabilities, like a device capability, to the table. And we want to make sure that the user doesn't have to think about that. And our application is just showing itself in the best light that it can. And those are just a few of the things that we can look at today, and a few of the things that we can look forward to in the future. So we have media queries. That's a little breakdown. If you don't know what those are, you can check it out there. User adaptive is what we're talking about now. It's this concept where a user is visiting our page and we are adapting to them. And we're going to do that in a lot of ways. So what we're going to build is we're going to build this form where it's going to look like this in the beginning. It's just an HTML document. And we'll go over that in just a second. And we're going to transform it into something that's responsive, is liquid, and has all these nice animations in it so that you can build a settings page or build a form. I feel like most experiences in the world eventually push you into a form, at which point, hopefully that form is easy to use, because that's sort of the money-making moment where someone either creates content or buys something, or they don't. So we got to make sure our forms are good and work well out of the box. So by the end, what we're going to have is a light and a dark theme, just with some CSS custom properties. We're going to have animations and accessibility. So we're going to make sure that this thing can be keyboard interacted, mouse interacted, and that the motion and the colors are all accessible. It's really cool stuff we're going to work on. We're going to make sure its layout is adaptive, and we're going to do this without media queries. We have one media query that checks to see the device orientation, but otherwise we try to do this very intrinsically. And this is sort of an advanced layout topic, is intrinsic layout, but we're going to be implementing one of those today so that it's responsive without a media query, just sort of folds into the space if it can or not, so it's sort of, you're agnostic to the device anyway. And then we're also going to use relative units and logical properties. Relative units are units that we can use to respect a user's preference and build up from there. And logical properties are a way for us to not care about the direction of the document, whether someone's reading right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. We just want to be agnostic to that. I just want to lay it out how it looks for me now. Logical properties let us do that, where we can define the space with the way that it looks in my language and my computer right now. But anyone opening it up in a different language, in a different writing mode, different direction, they'll see it natively and naturally in theirs with all the spacing appropriate. And it's just really cool. So what you'll need is just a browser. Doesn't necessarily have to be Chrome. And let's dive into the next section here. This is getting all set up. So there's a few ways to do this. You can go to GitHub. So I have the repository here. You can find a link in the Code Lab. I recommend, though, using CodePen. So if you just follow the CodePen link and click the fork button right down here at the bottom right, that will just make a copy of this entire project, and you'll get CSS live reloading, HTML live reloading, all that stuff for free. You only need an account on CodePen if you want to save it. So if today you just want to kind of follow along in the workshop, don't even make an account. Just fork that CodePen and start working along with me, and everything will be fine. If you want to, though, you can work locally, download the code. I used Vite as a build system, and it's nice and fast and very minimal. Shouldn't put a whole lot of files on your computer. And yeah, that's a couple of the ways to get started there. I want to talk briefly about the HTML, and we'll get into that because this is not an HTML lesson. This wants to focus on CSS. So I had to kind of not do some things with y'all in the workshop. And one of them was write this HTML. So I'm providing what I feel is a reasonably semantic document form that tries to include as much as it can without any styles. And we'll briefly go over some of that stuff. But that's about the HTML and about kind of getting set up. And hopefully you have had enough time now to open up the CodePen, hit that fork button, and you're just ready to go. You're ready for like what's next. So let's check it out. Our next step here is adaptive interactions. All right, so our form, our document needs to be interactive. Now, CSS can kind of facilitate some of these things, but HTML gives us a lot of these for free. And by the end of this, we're going to make sure that we have a form that is gamepad and keyboard ready, mouse and touch ready, and screen reader or similar assistive technology ready. And we're going to do that so I'm going to kind of skip over some of the writing in here in the Code Lab in favor of filling in some of the gaps. This is a very advanced and beginner type of lesson. So I'm going to try to, I packed a lot into the writing, and I'm going to try to fill in some gaps audibly here. Like, one of the things is this works across all modern browsers, and we'll get into sort of when those moments are that you're sort of pushing out an older browser like IE, because we're going to do a lot of our color manipulation in CSS Calc with HSL, and that syntax doesn't work good with old IE. So anyway, I'll try to cover some of those things as well, but there will be a push and a pull between the document and our coding here. Okay, so for first one, we have grouping inputs. And so you can see that we have settings here is in this kind of weird box, and notifications are in this weird box. And those are grouped, and we're grouping those with the field set. That's an element for sort of grouping like typed inputs. And I've already got that set up for you, so you don't have to do anything there. But by using things like inputs and H2s and these sort of other semantic HTML elements, we're able to get keyboard navigation for free. We can tab between these, but we did have to go modify it a little bit. So there's a little GIF there that shows the experience beforehand and after. I like to add this CSS style here of outline offset 5 pixels. And that's just to give this a little bit output or a little bit of offset. So here I'm going to copy that and just paste it right down at the bottom of our CSS. So this is our first little copy paste. And now if I tab through, you can see that there's a little bit more space around our element. It's not quite so shrink wrapped. So there's things to try here now that that's there. Is you can try connecting a gamepad and moving through this. You can try using your keyboard. So I'm just hitting tab. If you know how to use a screen reader, go ahead and try to use a screen reader and just see what the basic experience is that we're trying to build upon here. Okay, let's talk about a mouse. So a mouse can even be getting like more affordances in a form through just a couple of proper HTML attributes. Now, I've already written them in the HTML for you, but the way that they work is like right now, if you look at the layout, even with no styles, it's hard to know which title and and description is with which checkbox. But since we did some proper labeling here, and I'll scroll down here, and we said that the input was for and the label was for certain input, we're able to hover over our label here, and that will highlight the appropriate checkbox. So I don't know if you can see that down here, but as I like highlight, and you can see this in your demo too, is if you highlight the right label and stuff, you'll see the appropriate and associated checkbox kind of, toggle a little bit in its style. And I think that's really important for users to know which one visually, right, with a mouse, like which checkbox is associated with which label, and you can create that connection there just in the HTML. And then you also get the affordance of you can click the label itself to toggle the checkbox. So you sort of like increase its hit area. You create this connection so that the label and the checkbox are tied together. Anyway, it's just a whole bunch of wins, and you get it right there in the HTML. Some things to note about a screen reader. So a screen reader is essentially someone's coming here and they can't see. Well, we have icons, which really are only good for people who can see. So one of the things that we do in the HTML here is we put aria hidden equals true on those. So I'm putting an icon inside of a picture element. And by putting aria hidden on those pictures, we now no longer tab through the icon and the label and this item here. We can sort of say, hey, this is visually hidden. I want this to be available for mouse users, but screen reader users, they don't need to stop on this icon. It's just not going to do them any value, right? It's just sort of an unnecessary stop along the way. So for user experience purposes, we can just sort of say, it's hidden from you. And now as they tab through and they're working through our document without sight, they'll skip over the things that were made for sighted users. So kind of just cool little things that we're doing in here for this user adaptive form. Users are coming here, they bring their own tools to the table, and we want to make sure that we're handling all those as good as we can. So our HTML has set us up really well for that, which is using input sliders, some checkboxes, and a couple of these little attributes on our elements to connect them to the rest of the thing. So let's move on to our next section, into the kind of exciting section, the first one, which is adaptive layouts. And by the end of this, we're going to have a spacing system. We're going to have flexible and responsive alignment and spacing, and we're going to have a responsive layout. We're going to use logical properties, and I'll talk briefly about those. And we're going to write a media query or two just to sort of like finesse those edges. Okay, so for spacing, let's jump into our first copy and paste task here, which is this root copy paste. So we're going to copy and paste all of that. And I'm going to put this at the top of my style sheet, but honestly, you can throw it right at the bottom if you want. It's not that big a deal. And you should see no change because all we've done is defined some custom properties that create a spacing system. It's like a pseudo system. You could see it's just like a quarter rem here. So we're using that rem unit. The rem unit, I do have some links. Look, it's right here. Mindful of a user's preference. If you're curious how the rem is mindful of a user's preference, follow that link and study it, and you'll see what we mean. And so by using a quarter rem here, that's our smallest unit. Half rem is our extra small. And I kind of liked this naming, because that way a designer or someone could come up and be like, that spacing between those two elements, can you make that extra large? And then you can be like, well, yeah, that's exactly what my custom property is named. How did you know? Maybe that would happen to you. I don't know. I hope it does. It'd be really fun. Anyway, okay, so all we did is paste some variables. We haven't used them, and so they're pretty much null at this point. They're not doing any value. So let's add our first set of page styles. Now, these styles here are kind of what some people might call a reset. And that's not necessarily far off, but it's not a full reset. And you can see essentially what it did is it took all the space out of all our elements. And that's because right here, we're selecting every element, we're setting its margin to 0 and its box sizing to border box. That might not work for your app, but it's going to be how we start this one. We're going to be using a lot more gap in our layout today. And so we're going to start by zeroing out margins because we're going to have container-owned spacing, whereas margin is a child-owned space. We set the document to 100% height. So block size is a logical property for the vertical. It's like the way that your paragraphs stack. And in this case, it's the height of our document. Block size is height in Latin. Anyway, and inline size would be width. And we'll see that here in a second. So then the body is set to min of the block size. So essentially we're saying like, hey, HTML document, fit the viewport, and the body should fit that HTML document. Did you know that there's two nodes between you and your other elements? Anyway, so that's what that's doing. Then we have some padding here. We have padding block start and padding block end, and they're each using one of our custom properties. So we're using some light spacing on the top and bottom of our body, block start and block end. We'll go over some more logical properties in a second. Okay, so that's essentially what that pasted. It was just sort of like giving us this baseline, shrinking all of our elements and putting some padding on the body. Let's do some light typography as well. So I'm going to take this set of styles here and paste them underneath the body selector here. If you want, you can consolidate these, like take the font family here and put it up into the previous one. It's not required. For today, what I want you to really be focused on is what user-centric choices am I making in this code snippet? So when we paste it, what was our intent? And I'm hoping that that's the primary thing you take away from today is a lot of these things are rooted in our user. We're thinking about our user so often. Okay, so here's one, font family, system UI. This font family will come from whatever system they've chosen. So if they're on their favorite Linux machine, they're going to get a Linux font that looks exactly like their other system apps. If they're on Mac OS, they're going to get the beautiful San Francisco font, and it's going to look like all their other apps. Essentially, you make them not think. They're going to be reading content as legibly as they've been reading it all day because you didn't change it on them. You gave them just a sans serif system UI. There's even way more cool powers that come with system UI, but we won't get into those. I set a couple of font weights here on those headers. I don't change their size, so we're just going to use the native font size. And I set this small to have a line height of 1.5, and that's this guy here. And that's because by default, it was just so shrunk, and it was just too tight on the content. So anyway, that's what those are for. Let's talk briefly about logical properties. Okay, so logical properties I mentioned is an agnostic way for you to talk about a web layout or a box. Really, it's about a box. Is a box needs to have content in it, right? We always talk about CSS is all about boxes. And when we talk about logical properties, we want to talk about a box that's not necessarily about ourselves. So I like to think about it, if you ask someone and you want to shake their hand, you could ask for their right hand, which would be a physical reference, or you could ask for their strong hand. Logical properties are like asking for a user's strong hand and not assuming that they have a right hand, which is really important when you need to do layout that can go top to bottom, right to left, or top to bottom and right to left. You have to think about these boxes in a way of flow as opposed to appearance. So instead of saying it's the left side of a box, we'd say it's, in English or Latin, it'd be the inline start of a box. So it can be kind of initially confusing because no one talks about boxes this way, but over time, what we're going to have done is aligned everyone in the entire world on how to talk about boxes, because we have a way to talk about boxes that isn't about us. It's about the box. So I strongly recommend getting into these. They are a small change to the syntax that you write, but the output is drastically different. You're making a much more accessible and international document with your spacing using custom or logical properties. So there's also other things about this that you've probably already been getting trained on. Like you might know what flex start and flex end is, or like flex direction, row and column. These have all been training you with logical properties. You just didn't really know it. And so that flex start is the same thing as inline start. This is, think about it like the way where your writing starts. If you were to write by hand, that's your writing on the inline direction in English. And then your paragraphs stack on top of each other. Anyway, so you have blocks of paragraphs and you have inline, you write inline. So if you think about it, anyway, that helps me think about it. Maybe it'll help you. Let's get into some CSS. Today, our layouts are all done with grid. So I love Flexbox. I think it has tons of merit, but it just didn't end up being in this layout. And there's no particular reason. I think it's actually just that I needed more sized boxes. Like I had icons and stuff. I'm like, oh, I'll just make a column at this size and stick an icon in there. Anyway, Grid and Flexbox are both great at micro and macro layouts, but today Grid is going to do all of them. And then here's a screenshot that shows all the DevTools overlaid at once. So here, let's check that out. That's just fun. So if I hit Command-Shift-C, I'll open up the DevTools, and we can see over here on the right, I've got sort of grid tools, and I can toggle these on and toggle all of them on and start to see all the spacing that shows up in between all my elements here. So if you haven't used the grid dev tools, they're really nice for that. And that's how you interact with them. You sort of go into your elements panel and turn them on. You can also go over here to the layout panel and toggle them from here. Look, they're all on a list. You just turn these on. Really cool. So I'm going to pop the tools out there. I'm also just, while we had that open, I'm going to open up the DevTools again. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-P, and I'm going to go to Light Theme, and I can emulate CSS prefers color light here and just sort of show the light theme. I can also do that down here in the rendering panel, and I can toggle light and dark from here. So we'll be going over some of these things later once we do more color, but I just kind of wanted to show that right now while I had the DevTools open. All right, I'm going to close that out just to cancel out some of the emulation and go back into our layout. So I'm actually going to pull up the CSS here so that I'm looking more at the styles, because we're about to paste a lot more code. So here's the layout for our main element. And our main element is the primary element around the entire layout. So let's paste that at the bottom. All right, so display grid. So what did we get right off the bat here? We said display grid with a gap, a large gap. We put the content in the center and we put a little bit of padding on there. The padding is so that when we shrink down, we get some of the padding. And then the spacing here is really only between this header and these content items here. So grid by default creates rows. We put some space between the elements in there and we centered it all. Okay, let's check out what's our next one. Our form. Our form has our coolest layout, also the most complex layout. It's the most algorithmic of all the layouts, and the most intrinsic, and the one worth talking about the most, and the one that I've said and the most times with, right? Okay, so, but if you notice, we now have a responsive layout without a media query. And how does this layout know to kind of fold up or fold down these additional content boxes? Well, let's talk about that. So max width is the first sort of quirky aspect of this layout. And what this form needs to do with max width is say how big it can grow to. It's not normal for CSS and layout for you to do that, but with this grid layout, we did need to do that. And the reason is we're using this repeat auto fit min max algorithm, and it needs to know the absolute largest that it can grow to. And 100% is just not a value, like not a good value for it. It doesn't understand 100%. When something is shifting like this, 100% could mean just the width at the one vertical. And so you had to be explicit with max width. We also have two different gaps here. We have a row and a column gap, and that's so that this gap here in between these two sections is different than this gap here. This gap here is larger than this one. And in one little definition here, we can say the row and the column spacing. And so when this thing is folding on itself, it has a different amount of space when it's going here and it does here. It's just super cool. Grid is so rad. We align the items to flex start, and that's so that they don't get stretched. We can see that here. See how the bottom edge of these isn't the same? If we didn't have stretch there, those would be the same. And then let's get into this algorithm. Okay, so we're saying for each child, so this form has two field set sections that we want to be responsive, and we're going to say repeat auto fit min max. So we want to auto fit these elements at a minimum and a maximum of, we'll say a maximum of 35 characters, and we can see here that that's essentially this size that they are. They're saying I don't grow beyond 35 characters. That's my max. And that's what gives this next column the availability to auto fit, is there's a maximum there. And then the minimum is so that we can shrink super squishy. And I know that sounds kind of funky, but like min max has this issue where sometimes if you set min to 10 characters, you wouldn't get 100% flexibility at certain small viewports. And anyway, there's articles written about what this is doing exactly and why it's so tricky. Why does min max with a min function included here with like 10 characters, 100%? And it's just this little algorithmic edge case where when you're getting into a small viewport, you want 100% and not 10 characters. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're saying take the minimum. It's either 10 characters or 100%. And in this case, it's 100%. We want that to fill that space. So anyway, that was our trickiest layout. And I'm going to move on to our section. So here's our section. Paste this down here. Look at our HTML. So it went form and section. So each, the form element that we just gave that responsive layout is actually having a responsive set of sections. Oh, right. There's sections, not field sets, because the field set is the border and the section has a header and a field set, right? So cool. This section layout gave us gap between our header here and here. And here we can just kind of show that here. Pop open our DevTools, get into our section grid. And so here's that section grid we just made. Here's that form grid that we made. And we can see as we respond here, the difference in like gap that we see in the middle there versus the horizontal gap. And that's because that one definition that we did. We can get up in here to the main and see how it's responding. And then we can just see all three of these all together really quick just to see what are they doing and why did we need so many layouts? And you can see that just putting space between items often means you need another container and you need items to be wrapped in something. So that's where a lot of that came from. All right, I'm going to close out of DevTools, get back into here and check out our next layout, which is on the field set. So I'm going to grab this field set, pop down here and paste it. We can see that we dropped our padding around the edge here. We went to a display grid, which was kind of similar to what it was before, but then we're going to get some ability to put a gap in there. Notice our gap is 1 pixel. And that's really interesting here. If you can see the one, that like hairline between each of these, that's actually you looking through a gap into the background of the field set. So normally you might use like a border bottom and then say, if it's not the last item, don't have a border bottom, because otherwise you'd see like a double border down here. But with gap, I'm actually using gap as the hairline. And I thought that was just like, that's how designers think. At least that's how the surface feels or it looks like it should feel like the item should be able to swipe on this. Anyway, whatever, this might just be me thinking about it too hard, but I had a lot of fun making a hairline design choice with CSS grid gap. I just thought that was really nice. We have our border radius, which is using some of our custom properties for spacing. So notice our spacing is just sort of like medium and small and large and medium. And then we're staying really consistent by using our custom properties. And it's going to be one of the key things that has our layout looking so harmonious is that we used a limited palette of these spacing items. So anyway, we also set overflow hidden because we set a border radius, and we're about to set a color background on that later. And we're going to want that color to be contained in that border radius. Okay, let's check out field set item. I'm gonna make sure I grab all of that. Field set item. This is the only class, or one of the few class names that we wrote. And a field set item is for each of these items that sort of has an icon and has a slider and all these items inside of it. And we set a display to grid here. And look, our grid template columns, our first column is spacing large, and that's actually creating a column here for the icons. And then the rest of the item is this 1FR. So it's sort of a flexible amount of space and then a fixed size for the icon, which I think just makes a lot of sense, right? You're like, here's the space for the icon, center that icon in the space, and then give the fluid space to the rest of the content there. We add a gap using our spacing. We add some pacing or padding using our spacing. Nothing too confusing there. I thought that was really nice. Let's look at our field set item picture. And these are for each of our icons. And we're setting the block size and the inline size. This is, again, like height and width, except that it's agnostic to height and width. It will always be appropriate to the writing mode. And we're using our space XL. So we're taking that icon, we're giving it a very clear height and width. We're giving it a clip path of a circle at 50%, which we'll see later. It puts a circle, it will clip the element into a circle, almost like border radius, but I like the syntax a little bit better. Plus, we're going to animate it. We use display inline grid, and we place the content into the center. Great, let's check out field set item. And we have a cool selector in here using the is pseudo selector. It's the functional pseudo selector here is. Has great support these days. And here, if I pull this out, you should be able to see the full selector. Excellent. So we're saying field set item, if you have a direct descendant that is a picture or a direct descendant child that is an input type checkbox, place them into the center. And we see that here. So this item is placing itself into the center, and these icons are placing themselves into the center. They're sort of like claiming center ownership on their own. And that's what self is good for. Because not everything, well, that's why it's a direct descendant. You can go look at the code. Then not everything is always a direct descendant and needs to be centered. And so this way we target just those two elements that need that nudge. Let's look at our field set item SVG. So I'll grab this. I'll paste it under here. So these are going to be the actual like icon math values that are being used to draw the actual icon. So we created a column, then we created a firm box, and now we're going to size. We created the box so that we could put a circle around it and put some shape around it. Like here, let's preview over here, right? See how we have this circle around here, and as I interact with it, it grew. That's that clip path, and that's that outer box that we're working on right now. But now we're going to work on the SVG inside, and we're going to set its block size to var space medium. So essentially we're setting the actual icon size right here. And the other things, we're creating a box that had space around it so that the icon could be in a circle. And that's just, yeah, we're just burning right through it. Okay, so now we have small stack. And the reason this is small stack is this was just like a little utility class that created a grid and added gap. And I often call this grid just for gap. Like sometimes I use grid, I'll set display to grid just to use a gap. Gap is that good. And here's a kind of good example of it. So small stack went on top of numerous elements in here, and it's basically just to add an extra small amount of gap between items. You can go check the HTML to see where that was, but if I delete it here, you can see that, yeah, it was mostly up in here. Oh, we're taking the label and the sliders and the labels in these content here, and we're putting space between them, and we're setting them into a block direction. So we could see that those stacked again. All right, let's look at input type checkbox. And it's getting a height and width. And see, I thought this was nice because checkboxes are awfully small, even for an abled user with a mouse, and you can change the size of them. So I've essentially changed the height and width of them right here and make them much more clickable, and they render really nice. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't always increase the size of our checkboxes to be easier to use like that. Okay, and at this point, we've already done this a little bit. We'll just like open up DevTools and look at your various layouts. Like, look at what we have so far. Okay, and all we've done is created some CSS custom properties for spacing, and then a bunch of layout work where we took the HTML and we started putting the elements in the right spot and putting space between them. And look how far padding and proper gaps will get you. That's the majority of the work, at least in this case. And we've just taken this document, and this document will now work in all these other different languages and writing modes because we're using logical properties and grid, which will automatically do the sort of directionality work for us at the end of the day. So again, we're taking this like document that wasn't very good at adapting to users, and we're layering in all these different choices to make it more and more adaptive to more different use cases and different types of users. It's just so much fun. Okay, so let's check out this one. This selector says, if the width is greater than 540, we want to increase the padding on our main like layout. And if it's above 800, we're going to increase it even more. So it's essentially a mobile first type of strategy. I'll just paste this down here. And we can see the spacing on our body changed right there. And here, if I come back to this layout, we can check it out a lot more. So here's our body element, or here's our main. We can see the border around the side. Here, if I open up VisBug, I could even get that main with the padding. Yeah, okay. I'll hide VisBug there. So here's our padding at mobile. And as we grow, you just see we're now at 32. So we're using another one of our custom properties. And as we grow even more, we've grown to 48. So those are using rems, and VisBug is just reporting the calculated size here. But it's nice to see the padding as it's changing and as you resize there. So kind of cool little use of VisBug for a second, so that we could see our responsive padding. It's like this particular set of CSS is like gain more space around yourself as there's more space in the viewport, because that's an important decision for this main to look more airy and sort of lightweight, is to have it sort of start in a condensed mode like it's in a mobile phone, and then we're going to add more space to it as we grow. So let's do that again with our form. So here's our form. Let's go up to our form element. Now you don't have to do this either, but I'm gonna. And here's a custom property that got made called repeat. I'm going to add that to the top of the form element here. And then I'm going to update our grid template columns to have use of our new custom property. Or actually here, I'll just grab the custom property. You can copy and paste that whole thing if you want to. Well, here, I did it already. I'll just paste. And what we did is we replaced auto fit with number of columns. And so, or we will be doing that here in this media query. So by default, it's trying to auto fit elements in there. But what we've said is if it's landscape and the min width is 640, which is essentially like saying this is a mobile device in landscape, I specifically want 2 columns. Even if they're kind of difficult for you layout engine, like I want them to be that way. And so what we're doing is we're pivoting a custom property in that one media query situation that changes the grid template layout to be specifically a 2-column layout as opposed to sort of an intelligent auto fit. So we're grabbing the reins in this one use case, which is users on a mobile device going landscape are going to want to see 2 columns. Let's make sure it's 2. And that's what styles are there. I thought that was a good user-centric choice to make, that it kind of gets annoying if you want to use something in landscape and it still only has like 1 in the center. You're like, well, I have all this space. And it turned out that that layout did not auto fit in landscape and almost all the devices I tested. So I went in and I kind of made something more specific and said, this is what I want at this point. So anyway, here's another one we have. So this is our field set item. We're toggling some items or some values in it in a media query. I'll just pop this down at the bottom with our other media queries here. Pull this out so we can see it. Okay, so this one is, if we shrink here, we can see that we have like a kind of smaller space here. And as I grow, you see we gained more space here. As we continue growing, we gained more space. So this is just sort of this concept of like a compact versus a minimal layout. And all I'm doing is toggling spacing in a media query. You can see in our media query that we wrote here, it's just changing padding and changing grid template columns using our additional custom properties. So we're just kind of growing to an XL, growing to a double XL to gain more visual space. And I think just on a desktop, you need that air, you need that white space to feel elegant and to feel like it's not cramped. Where on mobile, we're accustomed to cramped layouts and they're not so bad. So anyway, again, that goes into this concept of where I'm trying to like build things kind of condensed by default, and then I expand them into a more airy and lightweight layout and spacing scenario with media queries as our viewport grows. All right, so things to try. We've kind of already tried some of this, but if you want to, you could check this out on mobile. check this out on a desktop. And really what we have here is, yeah, we have a compact and minimal layout that's responsive and intelligent enough on a mobile device to sort of make a smart decision about going two up into two columns. Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on to our next section because that's essentially it for our layout. Our layout is doing a lot of intelligent things already, and we've just used CSS Grid to so much of its power. We used a lot of really advanced grid layouts there. So if some of those felt a little far away for your current skill set, don't worry. I hope that like using them and seeing them and having me give a little bit of a verbal breakdown helped with those. And let's move on to color. Color is kind of equally intense. It has a lot of complexities that can happen inside of there, but don't worry. I'll try to walk you through it today so that by the end, you at least feel equipped enough to know why and how you could make a user adaptive color interface, like something that adjusts to their preferences. So we're going to have something that adjusts to light and dark at the end, something that has color scheme derived from a brand. So I think that's just a really primary use case, is that a designer will have decided on a brand color, or you'll get a red or a blue, and then you need to build a theme off of that. And we're going to do that today. And you'll notice that if you look at my color scheme here in the preview, it is kind of a bluish tint to it, and that is not by accident. If I click on the HTML and I come to the brand area here, here's the hue. I can change this hue. If I hit shift up and down, and you see it turning green, you see it turning purple, and here, it's using that hue as a base across it. So you look now, it's kind of pinkish and purplish. I'll go back to 200. This is sort of what I mean is you're pivoting off of a hue, off of a base brand color, and you're building very dark colors from it and very light colors, but not necessarily white or black. You can make really elegant themes if you try to reserve white and black for the moments when you really want a dark shadow or you really want a white highlight pop. And so those are some color tips for you here, and we're going to build that into our system today as we try to avoid using white and black and opt into basing everything off of a hue and build up from there. And that's why we get this nice bluish tinted, cool, dark theme. And we'll get a very nice, well, here, let's just see. Command Shift P. Let's emulate light. See, even this has a little bit of a blue hint to it. They are very light gray, but also very light blue gray. And I think most users might not notice, but they will know that there's a harmony here. And so let's build that. Let's build that harmony. I'll show you how I did it. And we're going to build accessible colors. So like if I launch VisBug here and I grab the accessibility tool, I can hover over all of these different colors and know that they are accessible. Right? Great. Passing, 12.45, 7.27. Okay. Bye VisBug and hello colors. Let's go back to CodePen and start setting up our brand channels. So I go through a little bit in the workflow here that we assume the color is #0AF. So I'm actually going to, let's open up DevTools again, Command Shift C. I'm just going to click something, come over here to the styles, hit color, and I'm going to paste that color. And so there's the blue. Here's the blue. That's our brand. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Shift and click that color swatch and convert it between RGB and HSL and all that sort of good stuff, because I want these color channels for free. So that's what that task here is grab that hex, go into a dev tool, find the HSL color channels, because we're going to be building up color using those channels specifically in HSL, which HSL stands for hue, saturation, lightness. And it makes for a really great way to sort of build custom themes because of this syntax. The way that you can talk about the color and compute on the color starts to make a lot of sense. Okay, let's get started then on adding some cool color to this. I'm gonna grab this root. I'm actually gonna grab the custom properties out of there. And again, you don't have to do that. I'm gonna come back to the top and put them here with the rest of the custom properties. And these are global custom properties, right? We have spacing that's being shared everywhere, and we have colors that are being shared everywhere. But we did make one local custom property earlier, right? Which was the repeat. We set it there in the form. We could have like form repeat and sort of like made that look like it was stuck into a component. But anyway, I like putting things at the root for global ones. And if you can, try to name your local custom properties to make sure that they just don't mix in with the global ones as you read them. Anyway, whatever. I've put our 3 color channels here into the color space. Let's see, how's time? Time looks like it's uh, getting towards the end, I think. So let's see. So if I've got my color channels there and I pop down here and I'm just going to paste the brand here. So again, I'm just creating a custom property and setting those different channels. We can see that I use the hue, right, that I create right here. It's just 200. I divide a 100% in two. So this is going to be 50% saturation and 50% lightness. And so that's going to give us a nice light desaturated brand color. And that's what we're going to use in the dark theme. So anyway, we'll kind of build up from there. I'm gonna grab these two. So I like thinking about colors in text and surface. So here's our 2 text colors, and here's our 4 surface colors. And if you look at them, they're all based off of the hue here. And then I'm just sort of setting absolute values. I'm saying, hey, this is a kind of saturated and almost white, kind of saturated and definitely still on the light side. So this third channel here is lightness. And then in my surfaces, I'm like, okay, they're still in the blue family. They're still slightly saturated and they're very dark. So as long as you have about 50% and 60% difference between your lightnesses here, you can build accessible color schemes fairly confidently. And I would definitely still say to measure, but that's just it's a healthy tip to sort of keep lightness very stark between these colors, and you'll make sure you have something that's accessible. Okay, so I'm going to grab this next media query here, which checks for the user's preference. So here's our first user preference media query. This is prefers color scheme light, and I'm just going to update the root. So if they do like a light theme, I'm going to update that brand color to be fully saturated. So notice I'm not dividing it by 2 like I was previously. We'll grab all of our text. Here's our text ones. Stick those next to brand. Grab this surface. Paste those surfaces in there. So essentially we have light and dark custom properties ready to be used. They're just not being used anywhere. So let's go use them. So the main one that I always like to use here is on the body. We're going to give it the background of surface 1 and the text color of text 1, right? So text 1 on surface 1 is an accessible color combination, and we want to use that. Let's paste it. I put that in the body selector there, and we can start to see our page is coming to life because I prefer a dark color scheme, and we've built this to handle dark color schemes. Now they're starting to apply. So here's our field set. It's got a border and a background color. Where's our field set item? Here it is. Paste that there. Our field set item itself. I said field set item before, but this is our field set item. Excellent. So notice that was a color on the whole surface there. This color is for each item, and there's our hairline. Our 1 pixel starts to show up there as the dividing color. And here's our field set item picture. Field set item picture gets a color, surface 4. Now we've used all 4 of our surfaces. We have this sort of one here around the icon. We have one on the field set item itself, one on the field set group, and then one on the background. So we have 4 surfaces, 2 text colors, and we're just using them all cleverly to make this whole layout. Let's get the field set item SVG and field set item focus within. So here's a new selector. And this one right down below it. So if the field set item is getting focus inside of it, we're going to change the color of the icon to be the brand color. And you can see that right here. Did you see it go blue? See it goes blue? So when we have interaction happening next to this, we get to change its color, and that's focus within. So we're saying, hey, if this field set item is getting interaction, some focus, we want to change the SVG child that's next to it. And I love it. You're going to see some other focus within work here. Here's our small. We're going to set that to custom color here, text 2. And then for a nice little kicker here on the root, if you set the color scheme to dark light, watch what happens to the checkboxes and inputs. So here. Okay. And so here we can see that we got custom colored checkboxes and SVG icons, and just with one little CSS property called color scheme, and you're signaling to the browser like it's okay for you to use those colors here. And I'm getting very closed up on time, so you're going to have to add these last styles yourself that reduce the motion. Our goal here is that we want to look to see if the user has a preference for reduced motion. And if we do, we're going to use color crossfades or opacity crossfades instead of some of the grow and shrink and scale animations that we would have done otherwise. And that would get you to the end here where it would be otherwise complete and responsive and adapting to users from across the world. And I hope you had a fun time in this workshop and feel inspired to go make new interfaces. All right, see you later, y'all. Bye.